Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Felicia Maxwell Barrett, and I'm the Executive Director of Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy. For those of you who might not be familiar with our organization, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit here in Utah, and our mission is to promote respect and understanding between the people of Utah and other nations. We use the guiding principle of citizen diplomacy, which is the concept that we all play a role in helping shape U.S. foreign relations, and we do it one handshake at a time. Except for recently, it seems like it's been one fist bump at a time. So for the last 50 years, we have hosted U.S. Department of State international exchange programs, where we have invited delegations from around the world to engage with businesses, nonprofits, government entities, and individuals to exchange best practices, ideas, and connect with one another. And for global delegations who visit Utah, their connection to our state and people are solidified. For example, 2 years ago, we hosted a business owner from Mexico who ran a brewery. And after his visit to Utah, he said the following: "You wake up feeling like you're in a dream, amazed by all the good things that Utah has to offer, the people, the commitment to community, the food, and the landscape. It's like Disneyland for entrepreneurs." Now talk about life elevated. And as a member of the World Affairs Councils of America, we have hosted more than 100 lectures as part of our Ambassador John Price and Marcia Price World Affairs Lecture Series. Our lectures convene leading global voices to discuss topics that help shape public discourse and transform how we engage the world. We can only accomplish rich and robust programming because of support from you, people in our community who meet with our delegations and attend our events like today's panel discussion, so thank you. I also want to take a minute to recognize my board of directors. We've got quite a few here, if you'll stand up. And also, if you've been part of our board of directors, will you please kindly stand up? Shane. And then an amazing staff who worked endlessly to put this event together. I also want to thank World Affairs Councils of America, especially Bill Clifford, who is the president and CEO, who traveled to Utah to join us for this event. Thank you for your continued support of UCCD by connecting us to outstanding opportunities that enrich Utah's community. Thank you. Thank you to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for viewing Utah as a valuable partner in advancing U.S. Japan relations. We recognize that close cooperations and open discussion plays a significant role in increasing regional peace and stability. And then thank you to our panelists as well. We're so glad that you're here in Utah. Certainly, last but not least, is World Trade Center Utah for partnering with us on today's event. With that being said, I'll welcome Miles Hansen, President and CEO, to share more information about World Trade Center Utah.
You know, Felicia mentioned a little bit about what UCCD does. And for those who aren't familiar, it's like to amplify one element of that, the State Department programming, where the UCCD is working with the State Department to bring international leaders here to the state to get an in-depth perspective on what makes Utah so great. I worked at the U.S. Consulate General in Dubai, U.S. Embassy in Saudi Arabia, and U.S. Embassy in Armenia, and I was on the other end of this process where we were actively working to identify high potential, young, up-and-coming leaders to participate in the State Department program. We would see them before they left, and we knew them very well. They would come and spend time here in the United States, usually 2 or 3 weeks. Then they would come back, and I saw the on-the-ground difference it makes for the individuals participating in these programs as they go back to their countries with a better perspective of what makes the United States unique, in this case, what makes Utah unique, an appreciation for our government, our culture, education systems, business, whatever the focus of that particular program was. And then they come back more empowered to make a difference in their countries. And they are partners and allies to the United States as they go throughout their careers. So thank you, Felicia, for the great leadership that you provide here in Utah on that program, because it's important in cultivating leaders all around the world and partners that we can use, whether or not we're working on culture and education or, like World Trade Center Utah does, trade and investment. So very briefly, for those who aren't familiar, World Trade Center Utah is the entity that does trade promotion on behalf of the state of Utah and the Utah business community. What we do is we work hard to increase exports coming out of the state, international sales for Utah companies, attracting investment here to the state, And as we're doing that, we're working very hard to elevate Utah's status as a global hub for trade, investment, and business. And we do it by, with, and through our partnerships here in the state, including UCCD. And as I thought about what would be helpful to share at the beginning of this panel discussion, you've got a phenomenal panel here today, I thought I could give a quick recap on Utah and Japan's trade and investment relationship. Over the past 5 years, we've seen the volume of trade between Utah and Japan double, which says this growth chart, that the growth line is going in the right direction. Recognizing that, we wanted to find a way, how do we make that growth trend even steeper? So we organized a trade mission working with GOED, and you'll have a chance to hear from Franz in a minute, to take the governor and a business delegation to Japan. And so we went there in September. We have somebody here from Kaden Ren, I believe. Kaden Ren was a phenomenal, there we go, right there, phenomenal partner in helping us organize that trip. We took, a total delegation of 45 or 50 people, and we had phenomenal meetings. We had, at one time, we had, 8 or 9 different meetings happening all at the same time as companies, both sometimes in one-on-one meetings and larger group meetings, the governor's meetings. And through that, we saw our Utah companies identify new partners, increase their international sales. And we've had since then, Kawasaki has made multiple trips here to Utah. Mitsubishi has made multiple trips here to Utah to work on a few things, including a significant contract with a rural Utah company that's going to be transformative for this company that's doing great things out in rural Utah. We are working with SoftBank to have them come here to Utah. We are connecting them with our tech ecosystem and our investment community here. And so we see these the way that these partnerships, working through the trade mission, working with Kate Anren, tanky companies over there, is leading to very, very tangible outcomes to help Utah companies, to help build and strengthen the Utah-Japan relationship. And like I mentioned, the Governor's Office of Economic Development were an integral partner in that. And so with that, I am honored to introduce to you, everybody on the Utah side, I'll introduce a man that needs no introduction, Mr. Franz Kolb. For those who are visiting, if Utah were a country, Franz would be our Secretary of State. And so it's great to have Franz here. Franz, why don't you come on up here and you can share your perspective. But as I conclude, just again, thank you for all the partners that make this possible. Thank you for our friends from Sasakawa for organizing this, for convening this. Just like on the trade mission, our commitment to our Japanese partners were that we were going to work very hard after the trade mission to make sure there are tangible, positive outcomes. As we work here today and tomorrow at UVU, we will also be equally committed to make sure that as we follow up, we identify key areas of partnership that we plug in and support it, so we can again have tangible outcomes that result from all the work and energy that's going into the events and meetings today and tomorrow. So with that, please join me in welcoming Mr. Franz Kolb.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Franz Kolb. I'm the Director for International Trade and Diplomacy, the State of Utah. I'm just delighted to welcome our guest, konnichiwa. And I would like to recognize, we do have a few diplomats with us. I would like to recognize the Honorable Gary Nealman, the Honorary Consul of Brazil, who is here today. Welcome, sir. We have the President of the Consular Corps, Mr. David Utria, representing the country of Peru. Honorary Consul, welcome. And also we have the Honorary Consul of Spain here, my good friend Dr. Baldomero Lago. And I'd just like to say that tomorrow there will also be an event at Utah Valley University, and he handed out some information along those lines. The Governor's Office of Economic Development is key in promoting economic development throughout the state. We are so grateful for our World Trade Center connections that we have. I also like to recognize, before I sit down, Courtney, who's a colleague of mine from the World Trade Center, a colleague in crime. We are just putting another trade mission together. But I will never forget our trade mission to Japan and the kindness and it was explained and we received from our good friends in Japan. We have been building bridges now for a long time with Japan, and we are now reaping the benefits. I am so impressed by this country, and especially Keiran Ren, who is here, who, if you don't know what 5.0 is, please ask him. It's one of the best strategic approaches to economic development that you will ever find, using some of the United Nations principles. And I'm also grateful for Sasakawa, who is organizing this. And as I was looking through the brochure, I'm so excited to learn more. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be here. Japan is definitely one of our focus countries and will continue to build this wonderful bridge. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you, and long live Japan.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here in Utah. I'm coming from Washington, D.C., and it's my first time here, and what glorious weather to have in March it is, so thank you so much for having us. My name is Shanthi Shoji, Director of Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation, USA. I want to thank our partners who came together to both co-sponsor and produce this event. So we have Felicia and Perry from UCCD, and Bill Clifford from World Affairs Councils of America, and Miles and Hannah, who's been working so hard here from World Trade Center, Utah. Thank you so much. So Sasakawa USA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., and we are dedicated to strengthening and deepening the U.S. Japan alliance, both in regards to security and diplomacy. And we do that through research and programs that examine the bilateral relationship in context of the geopolitical situation within the Indo-Pacific. So we are holding this event here today, TAWA, as we call it for short, or the Alliance Working in America. This event, the importance of U.S.-Japan relations in, the importance of U.S.-Japan relations. And this is part of the series that we do. Through these events, we aim to spread awareness of the significance of the U.S.-Japan alliance by reaching out to regional leaders and the public outside of our DC bubble. The Utah relationship is a really unique one, actually. Following the Meiji restoration in 1872, a diplomatic mission, the Iwakura mission, was traveling through Utah, but due to heavy snowfall, they had to make a detour and stop here in Salt Lake City, and that is what launched interactions between Japanese and Mormons. So 148 years later, here we all are together in this room. We have Washington, D.C. based experts, local business representatives, and community leaders to discuss the importance of the U.S.-Japan alliance in regards to regional Utah and national interests. So thank you so much for joining us here today, and I look forward to the robust and meaningful discussion I'm sure we will have. And also, you can join us on the Twitterverse if you would like as we continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
All right. It is my honor to introduce today's moderator for the event. Dr. Akimoto is chairman of the board and president of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. He brings extensive experience in areas of business, research, intellectual dialogue, and student exchange between Japan and the United States. His career included roles at Mitsubishi, Hughes Electronics, DirecTV Japan, Massachusetts Corporation for Educational Telecommunications. Dr. Akimoto is a contributing writer for the Japan Times, Associate Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in the UK, and this is especially for Franz, a Japan Advisory Committee member of the Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria. Outside of the workplace, Dr. Akimoto has promoted student-athlete exchanges through football involving American and Japanese universities. He's also worked as a producer and as co-screenplay writer on a feature-length film called The Successor and other documentaries. He received a PhD in sociology and a master's in Eastern Asian Studies from Harvard University and a bachelor's of law in Keio University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Akimoto.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be in Utah. I just wanted to chime in with the other speakers that I'd like to thank UCCD, World Affairs Council of America, and World Trade Center, Utah. So thank you very much for making this event reality. Shanthi mentioned the historic encounter between Japan and Utah 150 years ago. I am old enough to talk about my personal history, so I'm going to talk about a little bit about my historic encounter with Utah. That was in 1977 when BYU football team came to Japan to play 2 games against poor Japanese boys. And it's real, you know. And I was helping the BYU football team moving around in Tokyo and Osaka. The team was great. It was nationally ranked at the time, and the quarterback, you know, some of you are old enough to remember the names like Gifford Nielsen, Mark Wilson, Todd Christensen, and so on and so forth. You know, this was a real football team. One thing, to be honest with you, the first game was held in Osaka, and 3 collarbones of Japanese players are broken. So second game in Tokyo, they didn't really hit, actually. You know, but anyway, one thing stood out to me about the BYU team in 1977 was not just a football performance, but also a Asian American coach named Noam Chow. And Norm was, at the time, position coach. He's a Korean American from Hawaii. You know, I was really impressed because I thought that all the football coaches are mostly Caucasian and some Afro-American, but never an Asian American at the major football program. So I asked that to Coach Chow, and he said, BYU is special. BYU is a very welcoming place for foreigners to come and outsiders to come. Utah is special. Utah is welcoming state for foreigners and outsiders. And they said, he also said that people in Utah are very friendly. So I'd like to thank you for being very friendly. And by accident, when I was growing up in Japan twice, our next door neighbor were Japanese American. The first one was from Seattle, Washington. The second one is from Los Angeles, California. They told me a lot about life in America, you know, for this young kid. Come over to the state and study and so on and so forth. One of the things they mentioned was a Japanese-American experience of internment after Pearl Harbor. And they told me that the experiences of Japanese-American who came to Utah are a little different from experience of Japanese-American who went elsewhere because people are so nice. So I just wanted to cast a light on niceness of the state and the people. I just wanted to thank you. And here, I'll start the real part of my moderation. I'm so excited to have 3 wonderful panelists today. They have a division of labor. From far right, we have Ambassador Jim Zumwalt. He's going to be focusing on diplomatic and the political relationship between the 2 countries. Jim, up until last year, was 2 years ago, he was a professional career diplomat working for U.S. diplomacy. He spent many years in Japan and culminated in the position of DCM and chargé. He was also, his last position was ambassador to Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. And he is currently a distinguished senior fellow of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. He is also chairman of the Japan-America Society in Washington. Japanese government recognized Jim's long-term commitment to U.S. Japan relationship so that they bestowed Order of Rising Sun and gold rays to Jim last year. In the middle, we have Mr. Uozumi, who's the head of Keidanren, and couple of speakers mentioned Keidanren. Keidanren is a leading federation of Japanese big business. It's an engine of Japanese economic activities. Mr. Yoshizumi is a general manager of Washington office. Since they have only one office in the United States, he actually represents Keidanren in the entire United States. And the trade mission of Governor Albert visited Japan last September. Among other places, they visited Keidanren, had a very meaningful exchanges with the business leaders. And Mr. Uozumi will be focusing on macro economic business relationship between Japan and the United States. We have Mr. Lee Carter, who's focusing on his personal business experience, which is with Rakuten. He is the head of banking operation of Rakuten here in Salt Lake City. He has spent most of his business career in financial industry, and he joined Rakuten last year, correct?
September of 18.
Oh, September of 18. So he's going to be, we have a macro diplomacy political person, we have a macroeconomic business person, and we have a person who's going to be focusing on specific experiences working for a joint venture here in Utah. So I'm going to sit down and ask the speaker to speak for panelists to speak for 5 to 7 minutes, and I'm going to ask one single question to each panelist. Then we're going to open up for the Q&As. And this is on the record, and I'm looking forward to a vibrant discussion. So Jim, why don't you go ahead?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming today and for your interest in Japan. I know you're all busy, and we very much appreciate your attendance. I want to make 4 main points today. So let me preview that, and then we can get into the details. The first is that the United States and Japan enjoy strong and mutually beneficial ties. That seems a little obvious, but I'll get into that more. Second is that Japan is an important regional partner for the United States. And that matters because Asia matters for the United States, and Japan is one of our strongest partners in Asia. Third is American national security strategy. If you look at the stated national security strategy that was published in December of 2018, it talks about the threat of the emergence of near-peer competitors and the importance of allies and security partners in managing that concern. And Japan is one of those important allies. And then lastly, U.S. Japan relations are buttressed by incredibly high levels of public support on both sides. And this matters because we're 2 democracies, and governments will be implementing policies that are in accord with public opinion. And public opinion on both sides is very strong about the other side. So now let me get back to the first point. The United States and Japan enjoy strong, mutually beneficial ties. And the reason for that, I would posit, is that we share common values. We're both democracies. We believe in rule of law. We believe in human rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion. We also are 2 countries that would like to see a rules-based international order. So we're natural partners in working together because we have these mutual shared values. Second point, Asia matters, and it maybe goes without saying to this audience, because you're all very aware of the world, but Asia is 60% of the world's population, and over the next decade, over half of world growth will occur in Asia. So if we want to be growing ourselves, we want to be participating in that. That's just an obvious point. So Asia is important to us, but Japan is a very important regional partner that helps us stay engaged in Asia. And let me just give you, 2 examples. One is geography. If you're going from the United States to Asia, the first place you get to is Japan. It's a very natural jumping off point. If you look at American carriers like Delta, American, United Airlines, most of their routes to Asia go via Japan, especially Narita Airport. So geography is one reason. But a second reason why Japan is such an important partner for the United States in Asia is Japan is an incredibly important diplomatic partner. I mentioned our shared values and shared interests, but sometimes Japan can do things in Asia that's very difficult for us to do. And I'll just give you one example is in the Philippines when there was a presidential election and a new president was elected. To be honest, this was during the end of the Obama administration, but President Duterte had a very difficult relationship, or I should maybe say President Obama had a very difficult relationship with President Duterte because of some of the actions that President Duterte took that were seen as some human rights problems. And the United States is the former colonial power in the Philippines. There's a fair amount of resentment. It's difficult for the United States sometimes to speak up about issues like human rights in the Philippines when there's a record that maybe not be so positive about U.S.-Philippine relations prior to Philippine independence. And so Japan can do things in the Philippines that are difficult for us to do. Prime Minister Abe has an excellent relationship with President Duterte, and I think behind the scenes he can do more than we can do to try and ameliorate some of the concerns we have about how people are treated inside the Philippines. Another example is Myanmar, where for many years the United States had a policy of not engaging the military government in Myanmar. And in that vacuum, the Chinese very much expanded their presence in Myanmar. And Japan took a very different approach from the United States and nurtured its relations with the the authorities in Myanmar. And so when there was a shift toward a more democratic government, the Japanese were positioned to move in and help out that new government much better than we were. So it's very good for us to have a partner that is able to advance shared values that we have and do things in a way differently than we might do. So it's a strong partnership, and Japan is a wonderful diplomatic partner. The last point I'll make about Japan as a diplomatic partner, I worked in the State Department for 36 years, and one of my deepest memories was when Japan got elected as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Now, you probably all know there's 15 Security Council members, 5 are permanent, including the United States. 10 are elected to 2-year terms. Each region gets 2. And we very much wanted to see Japan be elected as one of the Asian representatives. And when that happened, our International Organizations Bureau, the people that do the United Nations, threw a party. They were so excited to have Japan back in the Security Council. And what they told me was, Japan's our best partner on the Security Council. We work together well, we divide up the work, and they were so thrilled to have Japan back in a position with a greater say in working with the United Nations. And this is just one example of how we work together so closely as diplomatic partners. The third point is Japan as a national security partner and ally. As you probably know, the United States and Japan signed a security treaty in 1960, so now that treaty has existed for 60 years. What some people may not realize is that this bilateral security treaty is the longest bilateral security treaty that has existed since the Treaty of Westphalia was signed. It's pretty amazing to think that we've gone on that long and we've maintained our relationship as strong security partners. And the reason is because I mentioned our shared values, but also our shared interests. And the Japanese public very much understands why it's important to have the United States as a strong security partner. What the United States brings to the table is we provide security guarantees. If Japan is attacked, we will come to Japan's defense. But Japan also brings a lot to the table, and the first thing they bring to the table is furnishing facilities for United States military to be in the region. Currently, there are 54,000 American troops in Japan. Japan hosts more American military troops than any other country in the world. That is especially important for the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force. Japan also, in addition to furnishing places for the United States to be, actually defrays a lot of the costs of stationing U.S. troops in Japan. Currently, under our present agreement, Japan pays, or not pays, but Japan furnishes $1.9 billion per year to defray the costs of stationing American forces in Japan. The largest amount of that money is to pay the salaries of 24,000 Japanese workers who work at U.S. bases. And if you've ever visited a U.S. military base, you realize there's a lot of civilians on the base because it's, to be honest, much less expensive to have plumbers and electricians and construction workers be civilians rather than be uniformed military. On a U.S. base in the United States, those are Americans that the United States, you, the taxpayer, pay for. But in Japan, that is paid for by the Japanese taxpayer. So what that means is that if we were to bring our forces from Japan back to the mainland United States and maintain the same capabilities, it would actually cost us more money than it is to station them in Japan. So that's a good example of Japan's contribution. And the last thing I'll mention on Japan's contribution as a security partner is Japan itself has a very capable self-defense force that partners closely with us and furnishes a lot of capabilities that we simply cannot do. I'll just give you one example of the United States Navy and the Maritime Self-Defense Forces work together very closely. They exercise together, they work together. And one of the capabilities that Japan brings to the table is Japan has an outstanding anti-submarine warfare capability. And one reason why that's so important to the United States is we have a home-ported aircraft carrier in Japan. It's the only, of our 13 aircraft carriers, there's only one that is home-ported abroad, and that's the aircraft carrier in Japan. But aircraft carriers are very vulnerable to attacks from submarines. They need protection. And often when our aircraft carrier is in the region, it's Japanese anti-submarine warfare capability that's protecting that carrier. So if the United States Navy had to invest in providing that capability, it would either we'd have to reduce our presence or we'd have to spend a lot more money in maintaining that kind of a capability. So that's just one example of how Japan brings a lot to the table in terms of working closely together with us as a security partner. And then finally, I mentioned the mutual popular support. Recent opinion polls in both sides, roughly 80% of the American public and 80% of the Japanese public agree that maintaining the security alliance between Japan and the United States is in our interest. And one reason I mention that here is the work that you're all doing in hosting Japanese delegations, Japanese exchange programs, is one reason why that public support is so high. That's just Akimoto-san mentioned his personal story, and my story is when I was 16 years old, I signed up to be an exchange student thinking I was going to Europe because I was studying German, and I ended up being sent to Japan. And I lived for a year with a Japanese family, went to a Japanese school. It really did change my life and change my life trajectory. But had there not been organizations who are willing to host a foreign student, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So the work that you're all doing in showcasing the best of American hospitality to foreigners really does make a difference, and certainly it makes a difference between the US and Japan. So just briefly to recapture the 4 main points, we have strong, mutually beneficial ties. Japan is an outstanding diplomatic partner, it's an outstanding security partner, and the strong public support on both sides gives me confidence that that positive relationship will continue in the future.
Well, Jim, looking back, one of the most important symbolic incident was in terms of close coordination between Japan and the United States was how they work Tomodachi operation right after the great earthquake in Japan 2011. You are at the center of decision making on the American side at the embassy in Tokyo. Would you like to elaborate, cast a light on that a little bit? You know, how symbolic that was, the close coordination, working together, and reflection of mutually share the value, as you said, and also strategic relationship between the two countries.
No, thank you very much for that question. Just briefly to recapture, I think most of you remember March 2011 when Japan was struck by a horrible earthquake. It was the second largest earthquake ever recorded in history, and it generated tremendous tsunamis, which devastated the Japanese coastline. There were 22,000 people killed and 400,000 people who were rendered homeless by this. I mean, it was a tragedy that's almost beyond our comprehension. And so it was a tragedy in Japan. The Japanese government had to spend time, obviously, recovering from that. And the United States, I think, really pitched in. I think the Japanese public acknowledged that it was very helpful for what the United States did in order to help Japan get through this crisis. What Satohito mentioned, the Operation Tomodachi was an effort where over 20, I mentioned there are 54,000 U.S. forces in Japan, and over half of them mobilized to provide logistical support to the Japanese relief effort. And one thing our military is very good at, especially in this kind of a tragedy, is logistics. And as I mentioned, you had 400,000 people who were homeless. This was still it was kind of wintertime. It was March 11, and at night it was below freezing, and people who didn't have shelter, who were either outside or staying in schools or gymnasiums, needed blankets, they needed food, they needed heat, needed medicines. And it was a strong effort on the part of the U.S. military and the Japanese self-defense forces to quickly provide the needed equipment and supplies that were needed in order to deal with this humanitarian tragedy.
Thank you. So Yasuhiro, you want to cast a light on macro economic business relationship between Japan and the United States. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this opportunity. So it's a great honor for me to speak about the U.S. Japan economic relationship in front of you. And it is a great pleasure for me. Actually, I was in Salt Lake City on July 24th. I enjoyed the Pioneers Day Parade on July 24th. And I took a picture of Governor Herbert and Mrs. Herbert as a parade. So unfortunately, I was not here as a tourist. I also took a picture of this. So there are some familiar faces. So I took this picture as a meeting with Governor Herbert. At this moment, Kedaren sent delegation to Salt Lake City to attend the National Governors Association summer meeting, which was held in July last year. So we have several meetings with governors, and we discuss about the business in the United States and how we Japanese companies can cooperate and can contribute to the U.S. economy. So that was a really great opportunity for Keidanren and myself. This list shows the recent meetings with governors. So Keidanren is trying to every effort to strengthen the relationship not only with the federal government and the Congress, but also with the state governments, because state governments can play very important role to develop business environment. So many Japanese companies are willing to expand their businesses in the United States. So this shows Keidanren. So our official name is Nippon Keizai Dantai Rengokai. It's too long to speak, so our abbreviation is Keidanren. So Nippon means Japan in English, and Keizai means economy and business. So Dantai means organization, and Rengokai means federation. So our name is Keidanren, and the English name is Japan Business Federation. So we have more than 1,400 member companies, which are most leading Japanese companies such as Toyota, Canon, Panasonic, Hitachi. So our current chairman is Mr. Nakanishi. He is chairman of Hitachi Limited. And the picture on your right is our headquarters office. So delegation of Governor Hubbard and Franz and some folks visited our headquarters office last September. So this map shows our engagement with state governments. Within these 5 years, Keidanren sent a delegation to 17 states and 28 cities. So we have a variety of activities, and one of the important activities is to send delegation that was consist of business leaders and executives and have a direct conversation with policymakers in the United States. And this graph shows the importance of the United States for Japanese companies. United States is a top destination for investment and export to Japanese companies. United States is the #1 country for investment and the #2 country for export from Japanese companies, just after China. So this shows the importance of the U.S. market for Japanese companies. And from the viewpoint of U.S., Japan is a top contributor to the United States. So Japanese investment in the United States is ranked as third, and the flow of the investment in 2017 and 2018, Japan is ranked as fourth, and the amount $66 billion in the United States. And one of the characteristics of Japanese investment is many Japanese companies invest in high quality industries. And one of the example is research and development activities. For 2 decades, the amount of R&D investment increases more than 4 times, from $2 billion to about $9 billion. And this shows export from the United States to abroad, which was created by Japanese companies. The amount is about $95 billion. If you compare with the United Kingdom, the amount is almost double. And Japanese companies are leading job creator in the United States. If you account the direct amount of the job creation, it's about 500,000 jobs. And if you include the indirect effects, the number would be more than 1.7 million jobs, which was created by Japanese companies in the United States. I want to talk about the relationship between Utah and Japan. This shows the export from each state to Japan, or each state to abroad. And the amount is about $1 billion from Utah. This color, different colors shows the amount of each state, and I think Utah is ranked as around middle. $1 billion is the amount, and almost 60% of export is goods export. and the remaining 40% is service export. This map shows the amount of job which was created by export by Japanese companies. The number is more than 5,000 jobs which was created by Japanese companies in Utah. And this map also shows Utah, the state of Utah is ranked around the middle. If you compare about the population of Utah, which was about 3 million people, I think the current situation is not so bad based on the population and the relationship with Japanese companies. And this graph shows consists or composed of the industries. There are 5 main industries which Japanese companies have businesses in Utah. There are computer and electronic products and manufacturing, minerals, passenger fares, and chemicals. Those are the main industries in Utah which were Japanese companies have businesses. So I will stop here. So thank you for your kind attention.
By the way, you find this booklet on your tables. And this is a research done by East-West Center, but the Sasakawa Peace Foundation Tokyo is partially sponsoring the study. And this casts a light on the various aspects of our U.S.-Japan relationship in the framework of how important Japan is to the United States and how important the United States is to Japan. Yasuhiro, you have done a great job of casting light on the macroeconomic business situations, both Japan and the United States and Japan and Utah. One of the joint ventures that, or the business venture that has attracted lots of attention is Hitachi Mitsubishi joint venture in Utah. Would you like to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. I want to introduce one example of the business project by Japanese companies, which was Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems. They announced last year they will create a new project in Utah, which is a joint project with Magna Development. That is a project to storage renewable energy in Utah. That relates to the hydrogen product. That's a really good example for Utah to focusing on what to invite Japanese companies to around this area. Many Japanese companies are interested in those kind of areas.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Carter.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm glad to be able to be here with all of you this afternoon. I'm an example of the micro approach to the Japanese-Utah connection and Japanese-U.S. relations. I work for Rakuten. How many of you have heard of the company Rakuten? Hey, we're getting better. If I'd have asked that 2 years ago, none of you probably would have heard of it. We've been doing a lot of advertising here in the United States. Rakuten is a very large industrial company in Japan. If we were in Japan, all of you would know Rakuten. It's a common household word in Japan. Our chairman is well known in Japan, and the company only started in 1997, but has been a pretty dramatic growth experience and a pretty dramatic success experience in Japan. I was able to join the trade mission in Japan last summer. I was privileged to be there. Governor Herbert actually came and met with our chairman, Hiroshi Mikitani. I was privileged to sit at the table. I'll tell you just one quick anecdote. The governor kept referring to Rakuten. And I said, Governor, you play tennis, don't you? And he said, yes. And I said, well, take your racket and hang a $10 bill on it, and it's a Rakuten. He said, oh, I get it. I can say that now. And it was fun to have that exchange between our chairman and the governor. The governor is a great ambassador of the state, and the Trade Mission and World Trade Center did a great job of that trade mission. This part of the mission actually came to Rakuten's headquarters and spent part of an afternoon, which was a terrific exchange about Japan and U.S. business development, especially about Utah and Japan business development. Rakuten came to the United States a few years ago. We bought a very large company here called Ebates, which is a cash rebate company, online rebates. We've since rebranded that to Rakuten Rewards, and so now we're doing some consolidating of branding here in the United States. We have banking operations and financial services in Japan, and I have been selected to head up a banking operation here in the state of Utah. We have financial interests in several different areas in the world. We have a bank in Luxembourg. We have a bank in Taiwan. And because we have a large presence with a large number of clients here in the United States, about 50 million people have signed up with Ebates over the years. We have about 13 million of them that are active on a monthly basis, and we want to provide banking services for them. So Rakuten has a great interest in starting a banking operation. We came here into the state of Utah a few years ago and bought a very successful media company called Media Forge. That's since been rebranded to Rakuten Marketing, but that was our first entry into the state of Utah. We employ about 160 employees with Rakuten in Midvale. We're in the Union Park Center. And then when we decided to get into banking, we looked at several different areas where we could place that. And because of the nature of our business, we are eligible to have a Utah-based industrial bank. And so I've been deeply involved in that process to get Rakuten a banking license here in the state of Utah. We have applied for that license in July of last year. We're working now with our regulators to see if they'll let us have a banking license and start providing banking services to our clients here in the United States. The Japanese connection for me has been very, very beneficial and very ideal. I worked for 7 years for the Swiss. I was the president of UBS Bank here, actually stationed also here in Salt Lake City. So I worked with the Swiss quite a bit through that process. Now transitioned to the Japanese. I found that to be a very comfortable transition for me. I love the Japanese-U.S. relations, and I more importantly love the Japanese-Utah relations. We're hopefully going to have another 100 employees that will be working for me here in the bank in the next couple of years. So it's another example of Japan coming, supporting the Utah economy, but more importantly, gaining great benefit from all of the resources that we have here in the state of Utah. And I think this is just one great example of this Utah-Japan partnership, and I think there'll be many more opportunities in the future for us to partner, not only with exports, but importing services from Japan and importing jobs here to work directly in companies that make a difference for Japanese companies here in the state of Utah. So I'll probably stop there.
Thank you very much. Reality of foreign direct investment in the United States is one aspect of it is states are competing against each other. And Utah has an advantage we talked about last night, which is welcoming people, welcoming business regulations, and also workforce. And in terms of workforce, Utah, last time I saw the map, is in the middle of the United States, and but workforce is pretty international. And the Mormon Church missionaries have some contributions in terms of bringing up young people who are exposed to international culture and community. You did the missionary work in Hong Kong, and your sister did the missionary work in Japan, and
Yes.
you have many people, friends, who did Japan. Would you like to comment a little bit about how this international aspect of workforce in Utah important to foreign direct investment, Japanese?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have a common experience with many people in the state of Utah. I was a farm boy. I grew up over the mountain here in Morgan County. I got dropped from being a farm boy into the middle of Hong Kong, and it was a pretty stressful situation for me, to say the least. But having had that experience, I left China, but China really never left me. And it profoundly changed my life. It changed the way I thought. It changed the way I viewed international people. It changed the way that I viewed my relationship to other people in the world. And it had just a profound effect on me. And it did on my friends who went to Japan, my friends who went to other places in the world. And now as we bring that back, and many of us have stayed here in the state of Utah, we now have a really interesting workforce where we've had international experience, and we bring that together. For instance, in my kind of business, where we're now working directly with a Japanese company, I don't have any employees right now that have direct Japan experience, but it gives them the opportunity of having had that international experience to have a great respect for the culture in which we work, to understand the differences in business relationships and the way that businesses take place. And so I have been very comfortable working with my Japanese counterparts. My boss lives in Tokyo. It's great having a boss 7,000 miles away, by the way. But it's been just a very comfortable experience for me. And as I bring employees in who have had those similar experiences, it gives a great confidence to me and to them to be able to bring those international experiences into the workforce and have that be a success factor for working for a foreign organization.
Thank you. Obviously, as you can tell, we rehearsed that, which question I'm going to ask each panelist. But I'm going to ask one question that I just came to my mind since you mentioned the fact that you worked for Swiss Bank. How do you compare work culture, Japanese culture, to Swiss culture?
Well, in a way, I think the cultures have a lot of similarities. They run on time, they're clean, they're principle-based. So for me, working for a Swiss company, and you know the Swiss are very particular. I love to go to Switzerland. Everything runs on time. And you know what? I went to Japan and everything runs on time there too. It's really an amazing cultural experience to find out that even cultures as diverse as Swiss and the Japanese still have some very common shared interest. I appreciated what you said about our common principles and the principles that we have between the two countries. And I think that's, I've been very lucky to have two major international experiences while living here in Salt Lake City. It's been pretty amazing to have that experience.
Great, thank you very much. So I'd like to open up the floor for Q&As, and if you could now state your name and your affiliation, and if I may say so, I was told to say this, so if you could now come quickly to the point, I would appreciate it. Okay. Any questions? So, Bill, thank you very much.
It's up to me to break the ice with an unrehearsed question. Truly, I just thought of it. This is the Alliance working, Bill Clifford, World Affairs Councils of America. Thank you. This is the Alliance working in America. And I have a question for mainly Jim, but others, on the Alliance working in Japan. The relationship has come such a long way that it's this strong and this popular among the average citizens. But I'd say recently, with our president's discussion about burden sharing and what allies ought to do, and sometimes how he phrases that, I think there's been a reaction in Japan that has been concerning. And so if you could talk about how that plays in the security relationship, the trade where an agreement was ended on TPP, and in civil society, how the alliance is working in Japan, and how on the fragility to resilience spectrum it sits.
No, thank you, but maybe I'll start and then some other people can jump in. But you're right that when President Trump came to office, there were certain actions which did stress the U.S. Japan relationship. And the first one you mentioned was the decision for the United States to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. Are you all familiar with TPP, or do I need to say what that is? You're familiar, okay, good. And Japan actually was a latecomer to the negotiation and mainly came in because they saw the United States creating a rule-based system where they were not a partner, a participant, and they wanted to be a rule maker, not a rule taker. And so they came in, and that great sacrifice, Prime Minister Abe implemented some very difficult political decisions, mainly opening Japan's agricultural market, which was very politically painful. People who were producing agricultural products were not eager to have more competition from the United States and others. But he made a decision that it was in Japan's overall interest to open its agricultural market as a price for gaining access to a much broader multilateral market. So after paying the political price and passing the legislation through the Diet that allowed Japan to meet its commitments, suddenly the United States says, we're no longer interested, we're withdrawing. And so Japan didn't really get the benefits that it was anticipating. And so that was a costly step for for Japan, or costly step for Japan. And then the second area I would mention that Bill talked about a little bit or hinted at was the rhetoric coming out of the United States. America first may sound appealing to Americans. It doesn't sound so appealing to foreign partners, and especially since our talk had been about partners and mutual benefit, and it's a little bit hard to reconcile that approach with America first as an approach. So that was another shock to the system. That said, I must say that I think Prime Minister Abe has really worked hard to nurture his relationship with our president. He was the first foreign leader to visit President-elect Trump up in Trump Tower in New York prior to his inauguration. And he's had, I think, over 30 phone calls in 3 years. And I forgot now how many meetings they've had, but Prime Minister Abe has really done an outstanding job of working to nurture his relationship with the president. And I think the Japanese public, knowing how important the United States is to Japan, appreciates the efforts of their leader in managing the relationship with the United States. So I guess my short answer to your question is yes, there are some challenges, but I think by and large the Japanese public still believes that a good relationship with the United States is important for Japan, and they very much credit their leader with helping mitigate some of the downside risks of being a partner of the United States. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
No.
I would just one small thing. From the viewpoint of economic aspects, the trade agreement is very critical as a fundamental for business activities. So if we have predictability for the future event or future businesses, that is really helpful to invest or to have trade relationship.